Um, Mic check, Curtis. Okay, great. Are we recording? Okay, great, wonderful. I see some people are still filtering in, so I'll just wait a moment for everyone to find their seats. Thank you so much for joining us on a Friday afternoon. Curtis, please let me know if I need to adjust my mic. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sarah Grant, Transportation Manager with the City and County of Broomfield, and co-presenting with me today is Bryce Hamilton, City Engineer, sitting up here in the front row. And this afternoon, we're going to be talking about Broomfield, transportation planning, and traffic engineering. And this presentation will provide an overview of our transportation and local regional progress and provide a policy overview as context for the basis that how we're building our transportation system here in Broomfield. We request that you please hold up all of your questions until the end. We'd be happy to answer those for you at that time. So first slide here. Are we up on the screen? Okay, perfect. Thank you. So just as a basis for our transportation planning, we updated alongside our comprehensive plan in 2016, also the Broomfield transportation plan. And so this was a seismic shift for Broomfield in shifting how our vision is for moving people from just moving vehicles to moving people. And that the work that Broomfield undertakes daily is not only to support the movement of people driving in vehicles, but also support the movement of people of all modes, all ages and abilities using the transportation system, understanding that not all people have the ability to drive. The vision also acknowledges that by supporting expanding access to multimodal options, Broomfielders may also reduce their dependence on single occupant vehicles and their impact on the environment. Next slide. So just as a quick summary of the goals outlined in the transportation plan, optimizing the capacity of our roadway for all modes of travel and providing options, as well as creating a connected system for all ages and abilities. Next slide. Also connecting our community with livable streets that are accessible, safe, and efficient for all people. And also regional transportation planning is really important for Broomfield, and I'll outline why with our transportation trends and land use and transportation, connecting these together as we move forward building Broomfield. Next slide. This data was collected in the 2016 transportation plan, and on average in Broomfield, Broomfielders own 1.8 vehicles per household, and we drive about 22,000 miles per year back in 2016. We've seen a drop in that to about 17,000 miles per household, and that is on track with trends that we do see in the DRCOG region. Vehicle miles traveled dropped significantly during the pandemic in 2020, and those numbers have bounced up since then, but not quite to the levels they were in 2016. On average, a Broomfield household spends about $14,000 a year on transportation costs, and this trend is up from 2016 as costs continue to climb for transportation. And so this is a really important aspect of the average household spending their resources on housing, and then second often is transportation the next largest expense, indicating how important it is to have many options for transportation in our community. Next slide. And providing some of the regional context here, Broomfield residents, destinations to work. Broomfield is a commuter community, and before COVID, 86% of our employed residents left for work in other communities, primarily in Denver and Boulder being the strongest areas where our Broomfield residents who are working were commuting to every day. Next slide. People who work in Broomfield and where they come from. Of the employees that work here in Broomfield, 88% of them commute into Broomfield every day. And only about 12% of our employment is a Broomfield resident. These regions are scattered, and about 10% from Westminster, 10% from Denver, and 8% from Thornton and others. Next slide. And so some of the work that we do in transportation planning, this is just an overview that I wanted to share. We review development plans to ensure that there's adequate multimodal and ADA access requirements, as well as considerations for regional connectivity plans. Our team also assists with planning with code updates related to transportation, such as parking and bicycle code updates that are underway right now. And coming up next year, we're looking at incorporating transportation demand management into our code to encourage all modes of transportation. Broomfield also conducts local transportation planning efforts, such as the PED bike assessment that I'll talk about a little bit later, the Midway Boulevard multimodal study that we recently completed. And coming up, we have a transit needs study and safety study next year. Broomfield also coordinates with our regional partners on corridors, such as working with CDOT, the Colorado Department of Transportation, on state highways in Broomfield throughout our community, including 120th Avenue, Colorado 7, US 287, Colorado 128, and 121, also known as Wadsworth. We work with RTD staff to keep up with RTD activities and advocate for Broomfield residents' needs. We work with DRCOG to ensure our regional priorities are included in those regional transportation plans so that we can compete for those federal dollars in Broomfield. We assist with capital project development and prioritization, as well as secure outside funding for transportation. We also support regional efforts such as Bike to Work Day and developed local programs such as the Flex Ride Zero Fare in Broomfield campaign that I'll talk about later. And finally, we also keep up with legislation and transportation and how it impacts Broomfield. Next slide. We've been working on a multimodal transportation system for a long time. And that multimodal vision that began over 20 years ago when we began working with our neighbors along US 36 to achieve this vision and create the US 36 mayors and commissioners, now known as the Northwest Mayors and Commissioners. And they've been working collaboratively and meeting to go to Washington, DC to lobby for the infrastructure improvements needed in Broomfield and for our region as a whole. We ultimately resulted in the improvements that you see today on the US 36 corridor, including managed lanes, bus rapid transit, a regional bikeway, and transportation demand management features. And largely the infrastructure was completed back in 2016. And while we were studying this, the voters approved the fast tracks in 2004, which included not only BRT, but also Northwest Rail. In 2019, we saw on the US 36 bikeway in Broomfield, we saw over 1,200 cyclists riding on the bikeway on Broomfield on Bike to Work Day. And the bus rapid transit system carried 3.3 million passengers along US 36 that year. And service has been reduced dramatically due to the decline in ridership due to COVID. And pre-COVID, we saw about almost 13,000 commuters on an average weekday on the Flatiron Flyer. And today's service from RTD is approximately 30% of the trips compared to pre-pandemic, and ridership is at a corresponding level. As RTD increases capacity with the workforce, we'll bring back service in areas where there is higher demand. Most recently, we have restored the Flatiron Flyer 2 Express, which has provided much relief to Broomfield residents boarding at the Broomfield stations because those routes were often quite full and standing room only. So we're very happy to have that service back, and RTD is committed to continue to work to expand service to bring them back to pre-COVID levels. Next slide. Moving on to Northwest Rail, the other component in the 2004 Fast Tracks vote. Originally, the corridor was envisioned a 41-mile corridor with 6 stations. One station was identified in Broomfield and also Flatiron Station. The corridor is planned for diesel units and required double tracking and sharing the operations with the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad. RTD currently does not have the fiscal capacity to complete the ultimate Northwest Rail project. And since then, the communities along the Northwest corridor, including Broomfield, have advocated for strategies to phase in service over time. The intent is to provide the startup service with minimal infrastructure and keep capital costs low and to phase in peak service. The proposal is 3 one-way trains in the AM and 3 one-way trains in the PM. And the service would be shared with the BNSF Railroad freight service and include a new maintenance facility in Longmont. Last year, RTD kicked off a 2-year study to evaluate the possibility of peak rail service and gather feedback from the community. Next slide. Part of this study includes providing updated engineering plans, cost estimates to determine the feasibility of peak service, determine the requirements to implement the operations of peak service, estimate capital operations and maintenance costs, identify feasible locations for maintenance facility in Longmont, and design in a manner to not preclude future service of any other passenger or intercity rail service along the corridor. This study is anticipated to be completed next year, and engagement is ongoing and available online on the RTD website. Next slide. Some other rail dates include that DRCOG and RTD have included Northwest Rail in the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan, and in a parallel effort, Front Range Passenger Rail has conducted an alternatives analysis that has identified Northwest Rail as a promising corridor for ridership potential. In 2021, 2 pieces of legislation passed, both supported by Broomfield Council, allowing for the creation of Front Range Passenger Rail District and some additional funding to continue the study of Front Range Passenger Rail in Colorado. The district began formation at the end of last year and recently submitted to the Federal Corridor Identification Program for federal funds to continue the next phase of study. More information is available online at ridethefrontrange.com. Next slide. So continuing our journey with our regional collaboration, US 36 was a very important corridor that we collaborated and worked on. But in addition to that, the Northwest Area Mobility Study was established in 2014 as a response to the delayed implementation of Northwest Rail. RTD conducted the study and identified 6 corridors. Colorado 119 was the highest priority to connect Longmont, as Longmont had yet to receive any benefit from the Fast Tracks plan. Colorado 7, along with US 287, are next on the priority, and also recommended including the phasing of Northwest Rail as the work that is being done right now by RTD. It also identified reverse managed lanes along I-25 from US 36 to Denver Union Station for bidirectional commutes. And a key remaining Fast Tracks commitment that Broomfield should be aware of is also that the US 36 and Broomfield Station included a second parking garage. Next slide. So these corridors that were seen on the previous slide, Colorado 7 and Broomfield is our top priority, next top priority on that list. And it spans just over 25 miles from Brighton to Boulder. And we've been working with our neighboring communities along that corridor for over 10 years. Next slide. And some quick stats of the corridor between Brighton and Boulder. We do expect almost 50,000 new residents and 38,000 new jobs to occur by 2050. And on average, 37% increase in traffic, with up to a 50% increase on the eastern end. We'll see the highest change in traffic. We estimate that around 10,000 people will take transit on Colorado 7 by 2050 with enhanced transit services and bus rapid transit. As for comparison, noted earlier, the Iron Flyer was about 12 to 13,000 daily riders on that service. The corridor cost is estimated upwards of $400,000, and we've already secured over $50 million so far, most of it in outside funds, federal funds, and state funds, leveraging local dollars to go far. The mobility hub at Colorado 7 I-25 is considered a separate but integrated project and estimated over $250 million to include interchange improvements, but also improvements on I-25. Next slide. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, but this is a high-level overview of all the investments of the funding that has been secured so far on Colorado 7, and this is to illustrate how holistically we're looking at the corridor from a regional perspective. Some areas still need further to develop, but some have already moved into engineering and design. Next slide. Oh, and I'll just note that more information is available on the CDOT website for this project for Colorado 7. For Broomfield, I'll focus more specifically on the work going on there. We have 3 significant projects that we're working on the capital side with the Colorado Department of Transportation. We have funding secured to complete design components for the Sheridan to I-25, as well as the Lowell intersection. The BRT station is under a concept development right now, and also corridor-wide planning activities have been undertaken, such as aerial LiDAR, a tech deployment plan, and a corridor bicycle plan that will help bring the whole corridor together as people travel. We've also secured additional funding to advance Lowell and the Sheridan intersection, as well as advancing County Line Road to Sheridan with our partners in Erie. And all of the above is funded with outside funding with some local dollars leveraged. Next slide. The next steps for Colorado 7 more immediately is a capacity expansion between Sheridan and I-25 so that there are 2 through lanes in each direction. And this effort is highly coordinated with development, Broomfield, and CDOT. And both Broomfield and CDOT are contributing funds, and developers are constructing some of those elements to allow for those 2 through lanes in each direction. Next slide. As previously mentioned, CDOT is allocating funds to implement an interim mobility hub at I-25 in Colorado 7. That is under design right now, and we anticipate that construction will occur in 2024 and open for service in 2025. Stakeholders continue to seek strategies to complete the design of the ultimate interchange improvements to support all modes of transportation. Next slide. Another corridor important to Broomfield is 120th Avenue, and recently we've completed, along with CDOT, a multimodal and safety study along 120th Avenue. We were continuing to work to refine next steps with CDOT, but more immediately right now we are under design with some side path infill projects, as well as transit improvements along 120th Avenue. Most significant gap is on the south side between Greenway and Chase, and that will be completed along with some smaller gaps, ADA ramp improvements, and improvements to transit stops. Right now, there's a project underway between Teller and Quay, a sidewalk and utility project, and you may see that work going on right now. So we're very excited to see those improvements happening quickly. Next slide. And finally, another important corridor identified in the regional plans is US 287, and we're working with CDOT and with our partners in Boulder County. There have been 2 phases of study. The first phase of study has been complete, and that identified some improvements for Broomfield, identifying elements such as bus queue jump lanes and signal priority with CDOT, and improving safety along US 287. The first phase of the study identified with improvements to improve multimodal access, with improvements to intersection and transit lanes, that the travel time between Broomfield and Longmont will improve by 42 to 49%, saving transit commuters 38 minutes during the peak service hours. Right now, there's a US 287 Vision Stereo study going on, and right now there is a virtual open house that is available for anyone to view on the Boulder County website and is linked in this presentation. Next slide. So moving on, I talked a lot about regional in Broomfield, but we've been doing a lot locally. So I will start off with the next slide here. After completion of the new transportation plan at the end of 2016, Broomfield initiated a pedestrian bicycle assessment to understand the priorities and develop a pipeline of projects to support multimodal transportation. We worked to identify deficiencies and missing links, gather input from the community, and develop a pedestrian bicycle network and a priority list of capital projects. Next slide. This is a slide about what we heard from the community. So we really heard from the community that there was a desire for low stress traffic routes, regional and local connectivity, more trails, safer crossings, more amenities like bike parking, and access from US 36 bikeway, as well as those bus stations, connections to the Broomfield Town Square area and County Commons. Other corridors to highlight were Midway Boulevard, Industrial Lane, Dillon, Sheridan, Nickel and Commerce Streets, and 120th Avenue. What we heard over 460 comments, and this is one of the early implementations of the Broomfield voice page. So we're very happy to get so much input from the community and hearing the community voice on this. And we're very happy to report that since 2016, a lot of work has been done on these corridors. Some of them are complete, some of them are in design right now or in the works, or we're actively working on making these improvements. And a lot of what we heard from the community all aligned with the prioritization process of capital projects. And I'll talk a little bit more about those capital projects a little bit later. Next slide. Another aspect was to develop a tiered network for active transportation. Feedback indicated a preference for low volume connections, focusing on trails, neighborhood streets, which was that staff has identified as the low stress network. A key aspect of this is to enhance the striping and wayfinding on this network to enhance navigation for people traveling by bike and by foot. Another fun aspect is leveraging some parts of this network as part of the Broomfield Artery Project to enhance public space with art, and that's an exciting collaboration that we have within Broomfield. Next slide. We also heard from the community that accessing the US 36 bikeway and US 36 transit stations by bike was one of the key themes. And Broomfield has done a lot of this work in this area, and many of these efforts began even before the assessment was complete. Some of the things included the US 36 bike and ride shelters. One opened last year, and we are opening 3 more within the next month or so. And so these are shelters located at the US 36 stations that provide an extra layer of security for people traveling by bike, where they can store their bike securely for several hours. We've also completed US 36 wayfinding signage in coordination with our neighbors along US 36. So there's a coordinated effort in order to navigate along US 36 between communities. Locally, we've done many projects, include Sheps Crossing, the US 36 bikeway realignment, Industrial Lane, and many more projects. And I'll talk more in a bit. Additionally, we've completed a wayfinding plan, and also right now we are working with Commuting Solutions on a regional bike share study to understand more ways to enhance first and final mile connectivity to our regional network. Thank you. Next slide. And the following slides are images of some of the larger transportation capital projects, and certainly these are not exhaustive, but just wanted to illustrate many of the projects that we've worked on over the last several years and show progress. This first one is Lowell Boulevard between 120th Avenue and 136th. And this is a complete street design with side path, bike lanes, and ADA improvements, which was completed in 2017. Next slide. One of the other elements that are outlined in our transportation plan is to remove barriers to transportation, in particular walking and biking. And often barriers can be man-made and actually often transportation barriers such as arterials, highways, railroads, or sometimes natural barriers such as drainages and waterways. Highlighted here is the Northwest Parkway underpass in the vicinity of Storage Deck near the US 36 interlock and interchange. Before these improvements, the residents in the area dubbed it the underpass to nowhere. Also, Shep's Crossing was a connection between Midway Boulevard and Industrial Lane to the path to US 36 bikeway over BNSF. This was a connection that has been strongly desired by the community, and also with the PED bike assessment identified as one of the highest need for connectivity. Also not pictured here, we recently completed a bridge in 2018 over Airport Creek, creating that connectivity over a waterway. All of these were trail projects, and Broomfield Transportation highly coordinates PED bike improvements with open space and trails. And kudos for open space and trails for undertaking these larger infrastructure improvements to remove barriers to active transportation in our community. Next slide. And Dillon Road was one of those areas identified in the pedestrian bicycle assessment. And this was completed in 2021. And though the end result seems to be largely transportation, the project was driven by the community's desire to improve the roadway. 144th Avenue in Dillon was so much more than a roadway project, including the general purpose lanes, intersection improvements, side path and ADA improvements, bike lanes and lighting. There was also significant work around utilities, undergrounding, water, sewer, stormwater and drainage, landscaping and relocation and piping of FRICO. So kudos to transportation CIP staff for completing such a large project and so many different elements that are just under the surface from what we see every day on the streets. Next slide. Broomfield is also committed to our regional connections and completed a realignment of the US 36 bikeway to meet the US 36 standard of 12-foot wide widths and appropriate grades to increase safety. This was a missing link in the 18-mile bikeway, dubbed as the highway for cyclists. Next slide. Other projects include improving safety at Legacy High School with queue jump lanes for bicycles and wider side paths for students. Nichols Street was also a key route that did not have any bicycle lanes. And so that was another project that we recently completed that helps create access between the neighborhoods and US 36. Next slide. And some of our projects, we're looking at them to be more complete elements in conjunction with other projects where PED bike may not be the main focus, and combining efforts reduces disruption in the neighborhood and circulation while bringing benefits to the community. Here highlighted is the example of the North Area Force Main project completed in 2021, which some of it ran along Zuni between 136 and Midway. And we were able to complete a widening of the side path and accommodate pedestrians and bicycles on a roadway where there's no room to add a bike lane. So to reduce disruption to the community, we were able to complete these two major construction projects at the same time. In 2018, we completed intersection improvements and a missing link between the Northwest Parkway Bridge to the intersection of Lowell and Sheridan. So that project was largely intersection focused, but we made sure we made connectivity improvements as well alongside that intersection project. Next slide. There's also infill projects. Sometimes projects combine with other projects. This one was also a culvert replacement project where we were able to infill a piece of critical side path infrastructure along US 287 near Blue Stair Park. And this was a missing link along a Colorado State highway. Next slide. And our most recent project that we recently completed is Industrial Lane Bikeway, Phase 1, connecting Commerce Nickel to US 36 and Shep's Crossing. Phase 2 is in design and funded with construction funding from federal dollars. Next slide. Another massive undertaking is to improve all of our railroad crossings with safety improvements to the satisfaction of the BNSF railroad, so they are not required to use their horn at the crossings. They may only use their horns if there's a reason for them to do so. All of these are now complete in Broomfield, and we are working on the elements to include bicycle and pedestrian access across these locations. And this effort to prioritize quiet zones in Broomfield began in coordination with the Northwest Rail communities as one of the items that we all agreed to prioritize along the rail corridors in our community. And the power of that regional coordination has resulted in 19 miles of completed quiet zones between Westminster and Boulder. Next slide. And the pedestrian bicycle project. So one of the other things in the pedal bike assessment, it provided us a toolbox to improve our on-street bikeways. And since 2016, we've completed over 21 miles of on-street bike lanes. And currently the work is coordinated with traffic, transportation, and public works and their annual pavement maintenance project. And we really appreciate the support of the public works team in coordination of their efforts to improve the network. Thank you. Next slide. And similarly, since the 2016 plan adoption, Broomfield has improved over 50 crossings with striping, as well as infrastructure such as flashing beacons, ped push buttons, and operational improvements in signage, coordinated through traffic and public works. Next slide. And I talked a little bit about our Midway plan. So one of the things that we heard from the community, that Midway Boulevard was a huge concern for active transportation, but that led us, we did not have any clear capital projects from that assessment. And so that led to the Midway multimodal plan, which some of you may have heard of. That was completed last year. We received over 1,800 comments from the community, very engaged in the project and largely positive and supportive of improving walking and biking along this corridor and in the community. Additional funding has been secured to advance the design, and we anticipate a lot more public engagement as the project progresses. Next slide. We also completed a wayfinding plan for active transportation. This was one of the items that was identified by the community in the ped bike assessment, as well as to support the low stress network that was identified. So that was completed last year, and we're working on next steps with open space and trails and parks for implementation of the plan. Next slide. This is an overview of what's coming up, what's on deck, things that are going on right now and things that we happen in the future. Huron Street, we're doing a conceptual study right now, and that's available on the Broomfield Voice page. The 3rd Avenue Broomfield Heights Improvement Project is on the Broomfield Voice, and coming up, Transit Needs Assessment and Safety Action Plan, which will be coming up next year. We have a lot of projects in design right now, and those are all there available on the slide. Next slide. In terms of livable streets, as one of our goals from the 2016 plan, in 2022, we completed an update of the Broomfield street standards to be more inclusive of all ages and abilities and modes on our streets. And that was completed in 2022. Next slide. I want to note a few more programs that we work on and collaborate. Broomfield Flex Ride is a curb-to-curb service operated by RTD in our community and available to all ages and abilities. And for many Broomfielders, it may be the only access to transit since fixed route service is very limited. Broomfield helped start up a few new programs. Zero Fare Summer began in 2018 before RTD started their Zero Fare program. And this is a way to promote the service and let Broomfield know that this is an option available to all ages and abilities in Broomfield. We recently expanded services in Broomfield, north of 144th Avenue into North Broomfield, and added Saturday service in the original Broomfield service area. This year, next year, we anticipate robust community planning efforts to conduct a transit needs assessment to further understand needs in our community. And in 2019, 28,000 trips were taken on the Broomfield Flex Ride services. Next slide. And well, I would be remiss if I did not mention also Broomfield operates their own service, Easy Ride, and that service conducted about 20,000 trips for older adults and adults with disabilities. And that's a service operated by the city and county of Broomfield. Next, I'm sorry, we'll stay on this slide. And then additionally, I wanted to note our partnership with CDOT and their Bustang service, which is an intercity bus service. This particular one is an intercity service available seasonally, connecting Denver to Estes Park and Rocky Mountain National Park. And new this year, in coordination with them, we were able to open a new stop location along that route at US 36 and Broomfield Station, opening up new affordable access to our national parks. Next slide. And finally, with our programs, we support our partners internally and externally to support a culture that encourages active transportation modes, including Dr. Cog's Way to Go Bike to Work Day and our station at Interlochen East Park. And we support Broomfield Summer Concert Series by providing bike valet and encouraging new residents living nearby to walk and bike. And this is a new program and a great collaboration that we have with our internal departments. Next slide. And I think that is it for me. Thank you so much. And I will pass it off to Bryce, our traffic engineer. Talk about traffic engineering. Thank you.
Mic check. Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Bryce Hammerton, Broomfield's traffic engineer, here to talk about traffic engineering. And this will just be a brief overview of traffic engineering, so definitely follow up afterwards if you have any questions. So starting off, what is traffic engineering? Traffic engineering is any engineering involving or impacting traffic on roadways to improve safety and efficiency. We review all signing and striping that's implemented on the roadway as part of roadway plans. And we also coordinate signing and striping changes with other staff. We implement signal timing plans for all signalized intersections. These plans can include left turn phasing, pedestrian crossing time, or coordination. And we organize data collection for all counts and crashes. And all development in Broomfield requires a traffic study to document the impact to the surrounding roadways and intersections. So for example, oftentimes developments have turn lanes at their access points, and it's at this point that that determination is made. And we review all traffic control plans for any construction in Broomfield. So in 2022, we reviewed 308 public-private improvement permits and 50 street closure permits. Most of these did include a TCP. And the two biggest items, traffic signal warrants and traffic mitigation, we'll get to in future slides. So starting out with traffic signals. And there is more detailed information at our website listed there. Also, if you search Broomfield traffic engineering into Google, it should take you to the same place. And traffic signals, when they are installed properly, can improve safety and efficiency at intersections. Broomfield currently has 90 traffic signals and 5 roundabouts. So if you go to the next slide, a traffic signal should not be installed without first completing an engineering study and meeting at least one of 9 traffic signal warrants. The warrants are listed in the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, also known as the MUTCD for short. And the most common warrants have traffic volume thresholds that are used. So as you can see in the graph here, just as an example, along the x-axis, as volume on the major roadway increases, that threshold to meet the warrant decreases. And we have some recently installed traffic signals at 136 in Aspen, Sheridan and 160th, and Sheridan and Olcott. And we also have some other intersections that we improved. Lowell and Middle Peak, we had the left turn lane. Sheridan, First Ave, there was improvements to turn lanes, signal poles, and pedestrian facilities. And Sheridan and Midway, there was improvements to turn lanes and bike facilities. There are also some upcoming and planned projects, including traffic signals at Midway and Willow Run, Lowell and Broadlands, and Nickel and Commerce. And we have a roundabout planned at Lamar and First Ave to be included as part of the Broomfield Town Square project. And then also we are doing an intersection evaluation at the Legacy High School student parking lot exit onto 136. So now moving on to traffic mitigation. Again, there's more detailed information at our website. And traffic mitigation usually involves speeding concerns, which we have a policy to address those. So it starts, we receive a concern, then we'll collect data and evaluate that data. And then if the criteria is met, we'll propose a treatment and perform outreach if we need to. Broomfield's current criteria includes volume, speed, crashes, and outreach. The minimum volume per day is 500 vehicles per day. The 85th percentile speed needs to be 7 miles per hour over the speed limit. And what that speed is the speed at which 85% of vehicles are driving at or below. And when the location is adjacent to a school, park, or care facility, that drops to 5 miles per hour. If there are 3 correctable crashes in a given year, then the criteria is automatically met. And when we do need to perform neighborhood outreach, 2/3 of the responses we receive need to be in favor. There are 2 types of traffic mitigation treatments: education and enforcement treatments, which are less invasive and do not require the neighborhood support. So these might be like signing and striping, police enforcement, speed radar signs, or educational flyers. And then we have engineering treatments, which we do require the support for. And these could be like speed cushions, traffic circles, or medians. We have some recently completed projects on Highland Park Drive, Spyglass, and Trails. And we have some planned projects on for the rest of 2023 on Netta, Perry, and 125th. So that brings us to the end. Thank you. And yeah, I guess we'll do questions now. Okay. Yep. Usually it's included in a intersection like alternatives analysis. So it could be either. If it meets a signal warrant, a roundabout would always be an alternative. And that's something that a lot of places like FHWA, for example, is really trying to push, using roundabouts more. Recently, I attended a presentation that they did, and roundabouts are proven to be safer from a safety standpoint. So the type of crashes are more side swipes as opposed to the like right angle head-on crashes that you see at intersections.
Can I give you? Sorry, I was too. Oh, okay, sorry. So also I live over by Willow Run and Midway, which is where you said you were putting a signal in. But I had a constituent over there tell me that from Willow Run to Hazel to Perry, the lights aren't timed correctly. So he has to stop at a bunch of different lights. How often do you do those type of studies, or is it just a one-time thing?
Yeah, we will do the major corridors every few years, 3 to 5 years, maybe. And then we can always look at it upon request as well. So if there's something that we need to look at in terms of coordination, we can definitely look at it and make sure it's optimized.
Relative to timing, I met with a resident local business owner who typically is going to work at 5 o'clock in the morning, often coming home late in the evening. And he said every time he has to stop at every light. 3 to 5 years seems to me to be rather infrequent. And so I would encourage some thought about increasing the frequency of those, because it's obviously inefficient. It contributes to pollution. I mean, there's a lot of things that are wrong with that. Another question I have, actually got several, but I'll limit this one for now. The Northwest Rail project, if I understood the map, it looks like rather than the original project going to Longmont and then to Boulder, this goes to Boulder and then Longmont. Is that correct?
If I understand you, thank you for the question. If I understand it correctly, what is the alignment for the Northwest Rail?
Right.
Yes, so from Denver Union Station, heading along the BNSF Railroad to Westminster, to Broomfield, Louisville, you may see their station there. It's kind of pretty close to downtown, up to Boulder Junction, which is on the east side of Boulder, and then continuing parallel to Highway 119 to Longmont.
Okay. So the other question is how that competes or cannibalizes BRT on 36, US 36, and proposed BRT on 287. I've always thought BRT is more logical. It's got to be cheaper. It's more flexible. I know everybody loves rail, And for the RTD board, nobody liked my view of rail. It's great, but it's awfully expensive. Comment on how those projects work together, please.
Thank you. Appreciate the question. So they're actually kind of different travel sheds. Maybe you're not going from Longmont all the way to Denver on rail, but perhaps you're stopping somewhere along the way. For example, the Louisville station is it's not near any one of the major arterials. It's not close to US 36 or US 287. So they do have some different travel sheds. And it's one of the things that they are looking at in the Northwest Rail Peak Service study, looking at those travel sheds, looking at the demand and looking at where people are traveling to and from. So for example, your destination, where those destinations are, where you're coming from and where you're going. So they serve different routes. They're not all on the exact same alignment. So like the example that I've given with Louisville, it's not near US 36. So getting off at, US 36 in Broomfield station, the station at McCaslin. And if your destination is more downtown Louisville, then that brings you closer to where you would like to go. Right, where the travel shed of where people are coming and going from and what those origins and destinations are.
I would still argue that those projects overlap in a significant way, and maybe both aren't needed, and therefore one would prioritize one which is more cost effective. One quick last question, and this goes to road maintenance. Yesterday, I think city manager, we had a presentation on economic forecast and budget. A question came up about the status of our infrastructure. I don't mean to blindside you, but city manager's response was to grade our infrastructure, we would get a C-. She said 10 years ago, there was one pothole truck. This year, there's one pothole truck. So I appreciate all the great projects you guys are doing, but how are we doing in terms of fundamental maintenance of streets, filling potholes, that sort of thing?
One for Public Works here.
So maybe I can help a little bit with that since nobody's here today from Public Works. I'm Abby. I'm one of the deputy city county managers. So hi to all of you and thanks for coming. We are amping that up. So part of that, so Seth, you kind of went right into our point, right? We had one pothole truck in 2001. We have one pothole truck today. Part of what you guys will see, or the residents will see, or me as a resident as well, we'll see in our budget proposed for 2024 is we are amping up our public works, because we've talked a lot about infrastructure all week long in all the different, whether it's development, whether we're talking about economic, fiscal sustainability. Infrastructure is a big conversation for Broomfield. We're aging as a community. We've been a city and county now. I remember when I was here and it was like 20 years, right? Now we're on year 22, right? And we're still climbing, and our infrastructure is aging right along with us. So that will be a big priority to amp up public works. I know that I talked to Ken yesterday. Ken is our director of public works, and they are working hard internally, especially with the streets team, to prioritize potholes, crack sealing, all of that stuff. The kicker is what I've learned from Ken. Ken is amazing. He's been here 34 years. He knows a lot of stuff. You get to learn from him every day. That's kind of a blessing. So a little shout out for Ken, is that the temperature really matters, right? I mean, we know what happened last winter we had a really hard winter. We had a really cold winter. And then all that water, it goes somewhere, right? So it goes underneath our streets and it can seep in. So then it causes us some problems on the street level. We heard from the community as part of the community survey when we talked about it in June, streets are a big priority. So they're working really hard to amp that up. The caveat I want to throw is that temperature and the timing of when they can complete certain pieces of what they do, it really does matter. So we always encourage people, if you have a question, it's kind of like what Bryce does every day. If you guys have a question about signals or a question about what's happening with our streets, reach out to us. Public Works has an email that you can email. You can call us, of course. And then I know Bryce, he had his website up there and you can contact him to ask those questions, because sometimes I know for myself as a resident who's lived here for 7 years, I'm like, oh, what? Okay. So what's going on with this? I don't understand why this has happened or why it's not being taken care of right away. There's a technical reason why they do what they do and when they can do it. So I appreciate that question and getting to kind of speak to that. They really do work hard, but we've got some work to do on the streets. There was another question. Thank you all. Yeah, thank you.
So a lot of information very fast. Maybe too fast. I as slow as I'm talking about it, that's about as fast as I listen. So do you have a PowerPoint? Is there a PowerPoint that you just did that is available that we could go over some of this information? A lot of information.
Yes, I believe we will be posting it on the Broomfield Voice page. Is that correct, Abby?
And if, because I've gotten so used to, I gotta have the mic in my hand or I get in trouble. We'll put it on the Broomfield Voice for all the forums, but if you want a printed copy tonight, just come see me. I can print it out. Sarah always shares those ahead of time, so I can print you one before you go. Sure.
All right, traffic signals. So are there traffic signals? And what I'm talking about particularly is south on Nichols over 120th. Railroad crossing right there. I've sat there through various, about maybe 3 or 4 cycles of signal changes and never gotten a green light. Are they designed that way? Because what I do is after the second time, I'll just break the law and go through the red. But
I was gonna say, can we get his name?
but I just wonder if it's designed that way, or is that a mistake and should I report it?
Yeah, to answer your question, yes, you should report it. They are designed with coordinate or with detection. So the minor roadway will have detection cameras and only turn on when a vehicle is detected. So if that's not happening, then yeah, report it and we'll get out and take a look at it.
Bryce loves when I send Sunday emails going, hey man, I was just sitting on Alcott and the signal isn't working. So yes, please report it.
I'll just add really quick that the intersection that you speak of, 120th Avenue and Nickel, is actually operated by the Colorado Department of Transportation. You can report it directly to them, but I know that we work really closely to them. So you can also reach out to us, Broomfield at transportation.org, and let us know, and we'll get in touch with our partners at CDOT.
I have an easy question. What's a bus queue? You said something about a bike queue. Is that a special lane for the buses?
Thank you. That is a great question. Yes. So bus queue jump lane. So it's a new design to increase the reliability of transit. So designing within the intersection, a lane for the bus to wait that's exclusive for buses at the intersection. So they're not waiting behind everybody else. They come up to the front of the line alongside everyone else waiting at the front of the intersection, and they're able to get in front of the traffic. So that increases the reliability in transit, because oftentimes buses will get stuck in traffic, and that reduces their reliability, that they'll actually make that time point on time. And then you're less likely to take transit because the bus is late or you don't know when it's coming. So it's a design feature to operationalize at the intersections to make sure they don't miss that jump. And with more advanced intersections can actually include transit signal priority. So that will actually hold a green a little bit longer. It knows a bus is coming. Let's hold that a few more seconds and let it get through, so it doesn't have to wait 2 minutes at an intersection and lose time. So some of those are the features that we're looking at and integrating on our arterials and state highways to increase the reliability of transit.
You mentioned the partnership with CDOT. Broomfield obviously has a whole lot of highways that come through our city, and it's often used as a selling point. But what that means is Broomfield as a city and county loses a lot of the decision-making power, right, on those state highways. I love what I'm hearing about multimodal transportation, pedestrian safety, that sort of stuff. At the Broomfield level, I see a little bit of that coming from CDOT. There's been a lot of talk this year about local control versus state control with housing. Is there a similar conversation going on with local control versus state control for state highways and roadways?
Thank you for the question. So no, they're not, at least not in Broomfield. We are not talking about taking over any CDOT highways. We're committed to working really closely with them. They are their highways to maintain. They take a lot of traffic and require a lot of maintenance. So if we were to take those over, would be a significant burden on local taxpayers to support those roadways. But I think the partnership that we have is ongoing with CDOT, and we work really closely to make those improvements through the plans and studies that you've seen, or even doing capital projects. For example, the project going on right now on 120th Avenue between Teller and Quay is one that is run by the city and county of Broomfield, of course, with CDOT being a partnership, and it is on their right of way. So we are working hard to close those gaps and work with CDOT to make it a better roadway for all modes of transportation.
Kind of as a follow-up.
That's okay.
No?
There you go.
Okay. Check, check.
We have to get you on the recording.
Okay, thank you. Okay, it's working. Thank you. It's my understanding that some local jurisdictions have intergovernmental agreements with CDOT to take over control of traffic signals. And so I just want to encourage you to explore that because there are obviously a lot of signals that folks experience that don't seem to be well timed or don't adjust for time of day to have the traffic signal timing change.
Yeah, so there haven't been any conversations, like Sarah said, recently on that. And it's obviously a much bigger conversation that we would have to have with a bunch of other departments. But it's definitely, something that we can take into consideration, and thank you for your comment on that.
Okay, and I'd like to follow up on the Q jump conversation too, because I have some personal experience with traffic modeling and realize that when you do something like a Q jump, it might take away a little bit of time from the time allotted for passenger cars in the intersection. And so the metric that I'm familiar with is the time of delay in a corridor, and would just want to encourage you with the 287 BRT in particular to make sure that that sort of thing's modeled so that it could be transparent for the public, that if we implement Q jumps or any other features that give priority to transit, that those of us who won't be on that bus but will be in our cars waiting in traffic on 287 will be apprised of how much delay will be added to our trip if you implement that. And maybe it can be done in a way that it doesn't add any time. I think it just is important to be transparent with the public when those decisions are being considered. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your comment. And I also encourage you to go to the Boulder County website and provide your comments as well directly, but we'll be sure to pass it on to the team. Thank you.
I'm Bear Owen. I live in Anthem Ranch. I have a question about the appropriateness of speed limits in various streets and how the decisions, what is the decision-making process? Do you have public hearings to take public input from neighbors and residents on what is the appropriate speed limit? I'll give you a couple of examples which are out of whack. One is parallel sections of of street between Dillon Road and destination south of there on both Sheridan and Lowell. One is 35, one is 40, and the types of terrain and neighborhoods they go through and the widths of the streets, the boulevards and dividers and so on are virtually identical. And yet there's a difference of 5 miles an hour in the speed limit. The other one is Dillon Road, since it's been widened to 4 lanes. The speed limit is 40. If you drive 40 there now, you'll be run over, rear-ended, shoved off the road. A much more appropriate speed limit than 40 for that downhill drive down to 287 would be 55 in my estimation. And one of these days, local police are going to start enforcing 40, and you're going to have a parade of angry people here. We build scofflaws if we have unrealistic speed limits on roads that are not suited to those speed limits. Either they're too high or they're too low. Thanks.
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts on that. One, the general thinking is that people will drive to the roadway that they're on. They won't so just lowering a speed limit won't necessarily bring people's speeds down or raising it, or people will just basically drive whatever they're going to drive. So the options, if we want to bring speeds down, are to design that roadway in a manner that people will drive that speed limit. In terms of setting the speed limit, the speeds should typically be set to within 5 miles per hour of the 85th percentile speed. So, when we're looking at setting a speed limit on a roadway, we'll do the study, collect some data on that, and see what the 85th percentile speed is. And if it's within 5 miles per hour of what is set of what the speed limit is, that's typically then where we consider it okay. And if not, the options are either raise the speed limit or design the roadway differently. And you mentioned Dillon Road. That is on my radar. We're doing our annual count data on all of the major arterials in Broomfield. I believe the consultant has already started doing that. So we're going to be getting some new data from this year out on Dillon Road, and we'll be looking at that speed limit. Yep. Yeah. So there would typically not be any public input. It is set based on an engineering study. If, like I said, the other option would be to design the roadway differently, which is usually a large project, bring in the curb lines, really narrow up the road. That would be one way to do it. Implementing traffic circles or medians. There's, a number of other things that could be done to bring speeds down to the current speed limit. So that would be the other option. So
You mentioned 85% of what people drive, the
Yep.
speed people drive.
So 85th
That would determine the speed you set. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so the 85th percentile speed, if you take every single person on the roadway, say there's 100 people that are driving, the 85th, whatever that speed the 85th vehicle is driving. So the 85th or the 15th fastest vehicle then would be the 85th percentile speed in that case.
And I think to Seth's point, so one thing I've learned working with Bryce and Sarah as well, is that they take that feedback all the time. So like exactly what you were asking about Dillon Road, I'll use that as an example. If that's feedback that our community is like, hey, so help me understand, here's what I'm seeing when I'm driving along Dillon Road. There are standards that we have to follow from an engineering perspective. There's guidelines that, you know, Bryce as a subject matter expert looks at, but you absolutely can engage with us on that. So even if there's not a neighborhood meeting per se in this specific process, I know there is on others for different things that come up, you still are welcome to contact Bryce. I know Bryce has had, I'm going to volunteer you here, Bryce, so hold on to your seat. Bryce has sat down with residents that have had concerns virtually, or if they come in person to kind of talk through some of what those concerns are, especially if they're asking for a study to happen. So please give us that feedback. I know that and Nancy pointed this out, and it's a good point to mention, and I know it was on the slides, but the transportation website on Broomfield's website is really well done. It's a good place to start. I think you guys also have a Be in the Loop, right? Sarah, do you have a Be in the Loop where you can subscribe so you get those updates? Like if transportation is one of those things that you're just like, listen, this is important to me, I want to know what's going on, you can subscribe to that, and then it will send you that Be in the Loop. And I don't know if I'm supposed to say this yet, so I might get myself in trouble, but coming back to Seth's point, I know that our Director of Public Works, Ken Rutt, is working on a similar thing for Public Works. It is not ready yet. We haven't even really seen what that template's going to look like, but he is working on that because we know we have a lot of interest in streets. I'm going to go back to John because I stole the mic from him.
Thanks. As we were talking about earlier, streets are expensive. They have to be designed, they have to be built, they have to be repaired, they have to be plowed, they have to be cleaned, all these sorts of things. So we know that the cost per mile for a high-speed roadway is a lot higher than the cost per mile of a 10-foot bike path or a 6-foot sidewalk or something like that. Are there any plans, either from a financial driver or a safety driver, for road diets in the city and county of Broomfield? Like less asphalt or fewer travel lanes in order to improve safety, improve outcomes?
Okay, yeah, not at this time.
Simple answers
Yeah.
are sometimes the right ones. Okay. I'm going to go to Seth and then I'll come back to Councilmember Lynn.
Did you say road diets? Interesting term. I understand it. I just wanted to likewise compliment you on the use of speed cushions, which the rest of us on this side of the dais would call speed bumps.
The fire department does not like speed bumps. So
Yeah, don't get us in trouble with North Metro. Okay.
Since I'm used to talking about Dillon Point, I just wanted to mention, I'm sure since you were involved in the traffic study there, that you would be cognizant of the fact that the traffic on Dillon Road is going to change dramatically once Dillon Point is finished. Now, if the consultant is doing the traffic study now on, as far as there's less traffic, people can go faster, I'm just wondering how the increase in volume in 2 years when that's finished and when Dillon Point is finished will factor into, would this be changed in 2 years then if the volume would necessitate a lesser speed?
Yeah, so you are correct. With more volume on a road, the speeds can definitely decrease. It would have to be pretty significant, is my belief, for out on Dillon right now. But that being said, if speeds do lower in any point in the future, we can always reevaluate a speed limit at that point in time as well.
If all my neighbors want to. It seems to me that what you're saying is that if I and all my neighbors believe that the speed limit is too low on Dillon Road between Lowell and 287, we just need to drive a lot faster and make your little rubber hoses jump more and record our speed, and then you guys will by fiat raise it on the basis of raw data.
So yes, you can answer, but I was just gonna tease Bear because Bear, you live up kind of in my neck of the woods as well. I hope the police chief isn't listening to the forum. You could get yourself a hot water. Don't get us in trouble.
Yeah. Thank you. I just wanted to offer a comment about the process that Bryce had outlined around setting speeds. And to our knowledge, the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, the MUTCD, which has not been updated in a very long time, 2009, is anticipated to be rolling out a new manual sometime probably within the next year or so. And there may be some changes in speed setting that will be outlined in that. So we'll be looking to those new protocols and processes in the MUTCD, Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices.
Who writes those standards?
FHWA,
Who?
the Federal Highway Administration.
Yeah, I appreciate you using the full term because we don't all
Sorry.
know the buzzwords and the jargon like you do, and we don't talk as fast as Ben Shapiro. Okay, so that's the kind of stuff that comes out of urban planning schools and transportation planning schools and that sort of thing. So it's part of the bureaucracy. Doesn't sound very people-centered to me, but I guess that's more of an ideological viewpoint.
Katie, did you? This is Katie Allen, our city and county engineer.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that the adoption of the MUTCD manual is required by state law. So the manual of uniform traffic control devices that he was talking about, that tells us when we can install a signal, how to set speed limits. That is, we're required to follow that by state law.
That actually anticipated my question, so I'll expand that just slightly. We're all asking a lot of things about where there's community impact, input, and things like that. Where exactly is their discretion? So, of the things we're talking about, how much is it state, federal, whatever law? So it doesn't really matter. It's just whatever the box says, and then you have standards, and you have to apply them. Versus where is their discretion that the city can take, that citizens can have input on, and so on?
Well, I guess a few different ways. The first maybe would be in CIP projects. Or sorry, capital improvement projects. So in some of those projects, we oftentimes will do public outreach if there's different alternatives, like if there's different cross sections for the roadway, we'll make sure to do public outreach on that and get feedback. That's one way. There are, if you have any traffic concerns, ever definitely reach out. There are things in the manual on uniform traffic control devices that are not listed as a standard, but are more so guidance or optional. So, some of those things we do have a little bit of flexibility on. An example might be like at a pedestrian crossing, putting a pedestrian crossing like diamond yellow sign that you might see around. That's an example of like an optional sign item that we typically get feedback on.
Thank you.
Doing it. Oh, I knew somebody had.
The comment about Dillon Point got me thinking. Whenever there's new development, there's very often feedback from the community that opposes the development because they believe it will bring in additional traffic congestion. To my knowledge, whenever a new development is proposed, no one asks, how are people going to get there, or how are people going to get to these new homes? It's just assumed that they will drive. It's assumed that that will be more cars on the road. That leads to more transportation planning, right? How does the transportation department work with planning, development, zoning, other departments within the city and county to make that multimodal vision a reality, rather than just assume, oh yeah, it's a new restaurant everyone's going to drive there instead of it's a new restaurant. It's going to need sidewalks out front. It's going to need bike parking. It's going to need a trail and green space, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I can chime in and then to start, and then maybe Sarah has a few things to add as well. But whenever a development comes into Broomfield, they need to submit a traffic study. Depending on how big the development is, that traffic study can vary between more of like just a letter. Like we're not going to make a single family home submit a full traffic study. But there are, so what we use to use traffic projections is the Institute of Transportation Engineers trip generation manual. So depending on what type of development it is, that manual tells us how many trips or vehicles that we should expect during the AM peak, during the PM peak to that development. And the manual also has factors that you can add for like transit or shared trips. Like if there's a McDonald's next to a office park or something like that, we can reduce some trips because of that. So those are things that all go into like the traffic study.
Thank you. And I'll also add that when we review those plans, we make sure that there are multimodal aspects throughout the site development, that there's public improvements made to the public right of way for non-motorized travel and connectivity within and to and from the public right of way. Bike parking is one of the things that we have been long requesting, and actually hasn't been a requirement, but many of our developments are very open to at least the short-term bike parking element. I don't think we've had much of an issue getting bike racks installed. As you might be aware right now, Broomfield is looking at parking code and as well as adding in a new bike parking code element. And that's under review right now, and it will be brought to council for first reading in October. And with those, we're looking at reductions in parking, where we've reviewed and seen that with our standards that we are actually asking for more parking than what is current standard for today. So we'll be seeing developments that can come in and not provide quite as much parking. Other elements in addition to that are, encouraging some of our multifamily developments to look at transportation demand management strategies. Right now, we're doing some research and looking at transportation demand management as possibly a code update next year. So we're just kind of embarking on that research to bring forward to council next summer and fall.
I'm doing that awkward teacher pause just to make sure I'm not missing anybody for questions.
Things seem to be winding down as observed. So I just thought I would let you know that how grateful I am that we haven't talked about carbon footprint and reducing carbon dioxide emissions as any of the drivers of what you're talking about today. Thank you. What I mean by that is that yet we don't seem to be driven by global climate change hysteria here in Broomfield yet.
All right. So on that note, I think what we'll do is we'll go ahead and end. Don't forget the session is recorded. So if anybody wants to go back, we did print some copies. Thank you to Catherine Lineup, our director of the library, who has been at all the forums this week. I appreciate you, Catherine, for getting those printed so folks can take one with if you want. It is going to be online as well. So if you're more electronic and you don't like the paper, that's fine. Thank you to Bryce and Sarah. I will say again, I've seen Sarah in some of these conversations, especially at the regional level, at the state level. We met with RTD just recently. She's an advocate. She's very passionate. She does a really good job. I also seen Bryce work with the residents, and he's always willing to listen if people have questions or feedback or to walk you through the process. So I just want to give a shout out to both of them. And of course, to their leader back there, Katie Allen, who's hiding back there and doesn't want me to. She never takes any credit, but Katie Allen, our city and county engineer, is amazing. So thank you all for being here, and we'll kind of hang around a minute after if you have any questions for us. Thanks.